on YouTube, so I wanted to piggyback off my NFL mock draft video, as I said I would do, and come up with basically my big board, my NFL draft rankings. And I'm going to start position by position, and then I'm going to move into just the overall big board, probably the top 100, maybe 200 rankings, depends on how deep I go into some of the other positions. So obviously I'm going to start with quarterbacks, and I'm going to go from 1 to 10. This is, again, my rankings, not anyone else's. And then also going to give my 5 outside. So start with number 1. You know what? Yeah, I'll start with number 1. Starting with number 1, I've got Jared Goff. So he projects for me as a top 5 pick. I think he projects for almost everyone as a top 5 pick. I think he's the best quarterback in the draft. Some people might think Paxton Lynch, but I think Paxton Lynch kind of took a hit for his draft stock after the Birmingham Bowl that Memphis lost. So, like I said, Jared Goff, for me, projects maybe top 5, at the very least a top 10 pick. He is a 6'4", 210 quarterback out of Cal, left a year early as a junior, and a guy who I think could be wildly successful. I also think that he benefited from Paxton Lynch's weak bowl game and a very monumental bowl game of his own against Air Force, where I believe he threw 6 touchdowns. Alright, so move on to my second quarterback, and I've got Paxton Lynch. So he is a 6'7", 245-pound quarterback out of Memphis. I think this guy has the highest upside out of anyone in the draft, most potential, at least out of my top 3 quarterbacks. So I have him projected as a top 15 pick, so I can't guarantee he's going to go in the top 5 or top 10. I think he will, but I think there's like a 75% chance of that happening, definitely nowhere near a guarantee. So, like I said, like I was mentioning before, he kind of fell far after the Memphis game where they lost to Auburn. He, at the middle of the season, was probably the highest projected quarterback. Jared Goff and Paxton Lynch kind of traded spots as the season went along, and then even a guy like Connor Cook and another guy like Christian Hackenberg, they really flip-flopped as it went along. At one time, Christian Hackenberg was probably the highest projected quarterback in this class. I'm guessing at one time Connor Cook was as well, maybe even at one time Cardale Jones. But this was a quarterback class that changed a lot and is not even close to being set in stone now. So, giving my third ranked quarterbacks, and I have a tie here. A lot of people are going to say one of the guys is a little bit overrated for me, but I have belief in him going into the NFL, and that is Carson Wentz and Christian Hackenberg. So Carson Wentz has been one of the highest rising draft stocks of really any quarterback. He is a 6'6", 231-pound quarterback out of North Dakota State. He is an extremely athletic quarterback. Didn't play that much this year, but was able to play in the national championship where they beat Jacksonville State. Now, he came back at the right time, obviously. Again, for being a 6'6" guy, he is very mobile. He's got a lot of tools that you would need to be a successful NFL quarterback. I have them both projected as late first to early second round picks. In my mock draft, I had Christian Hackenberg going to the Texans. I think it makes a lot of sense, bringing him back to Bill O'Brien, the coach that originally recruited him at Penn State. So I think that both these guys can be solid end of first round quarterbacks, or even a good steal in the beginning of the second round, maybe in the middle of the second round. So move on. Oh, sorry, I didn't really cover Christian Hackenberg there. So Christian Hackenberg is a 6'4" junior out of Penn State, 234 pounds. He left a year early. Now, again, he had some troubles this year. Even in the Tax Slayer Bowl, it looked like Penn State even benefited from him getting injured. That sounds bad, but it is kind of true. That's when Penn State started to come back against Georgia. It was a rough year for Christian Hackenberg with his final year at Penn State. Got sacked a lot and just really had no confidence the last 2 years, it seemed, at Penn State. I think it was good for him to leave a year early, start developing his NFL game actually in the NFL. So move on to my fourth ranked quarterback, I guess technically fifth, but I'm going to go with 4 here. So I got Connor Cook. For me, he projects as a second round quarterback. He is a 6'4", 219-pound quarterback out of Michigan State. Again, he projects for me in the second round. Had a decent season. Obviously, they made the college football playoff, but he's a little bit injury-prone at the end. Now, I don't think that's really going to carry over to the NFL. That was kind of a minor thing, but he's a quarterback that carries himself well. I think he's a very confident quarterback. He's a guy that has a good arm, good leader, and I think he can be pretty successful as maybe a plug-and-play guy, maybe 2-3 years down the line. I just think that the right team needs to pick him up in the second round, maybe Patriots, Broncos type team. Now, move on to my 5th-ranked quarterback, and a guy who I actually think has a chance to really do something in the NFL, and that is Kevin Hogan, the 6'4", 228-pound guy that left as a senior out of Stanford. For me, he projects as a 2nd to 3rd round quarterback. He's a guy that is not extremely athletic, but can move if he has to. Kind of has the same sort of mobility as Andrew Luck, maybe a little bit less speed, but around the same size, same frame. He's got great arm strength. He's a guy that really came through the final year this year at Stanford. Accuracy is seems like something that comes and goes. Inconsistencies is also something that's going to have to be developed a little bit further. I think he's a guy, like I said, that can be developed to be a pretty good NFL quarterback, maybe even a starter one day. So move on to my number 6 quarterback, and I've got the 6'3", 220-pound senior out of Western Kentucky, Brandon Doughty. I think the Doughty's a pretty streaky guy and kind of didn't really live up to the hype against tough competition this year, which might be an issue. But I think that he's a guy that does have a lot of upside, has a good arm, and really makes every player around him better. For me, he projects as a 3rd, 4th round quarterback, a guy that will add some depth to really whatever team takes him. I think he's a guy that, especially if an injury comes along, if you plug him, he'll probably play pretty well. Now, I've got a couple issues with Brandon Doughty. Again, one is I want to bring up the LSU game. It just seemed nothing was clicking in that game. It seemed like there were a couple times this year where that happened, just a couple times in Brandon Doughty's career. But also, he can get hot at the right times. The USF game was a very good example. Western Kentucky was able to come back from, I believe, down around 24 points and win that game. Might have been less than that, might have only been 14, but they were able to get a mount a decent comeback. It was at least 2-possession game and win that game. So, move on to my 7th overall quarterback. Excuse me, and I've got the big 6'5", 250-pound junior out of Ohio State. That is Cardale Jones. So obviously he did leave a year early, but that's really the best option for him. I mean, JT Barrett has the reins to that offense now, and Cardale Jones projects actually as a decent NFL quarterback. He's got a good arm, athletic guy, can move around in the pocket. He projects for me as a 3rd to 4th round quarterback. Obviously a guy who's got a decent amount of upside, especially if you got a good team around him. He's a guy that's going to have to be developed, and he's not ever going to be a guy that throws for 400 yards, 5 touchdowns every game. I think that's not the guy you're looking for, but this is a guy that can hand you 250 pounds, 2 touchdowns, and maybe another 50 pounds, 100 yards, or 50 pounds, 50 yards and 1 touchdown on the ground. He's obviously hard to get down, big guy, really moves well for how big he is, and I really think he's a guy that could slip a little bit further. Seems like that kind of stock for Cardale Jones right now. Obviously, he didn't play really a whole lot this year. JT Barrett kind of took the reins after about the midway point in the season. And while he does have a national championship to his name, he doesn't have an extraordinary amount of playing time, which could hurt him. Also, I mean, if he ends up being a bust, I guess that could help him. So move on to my number 8th ranked quarterback, and I've got him a little bit higher than probably most people, but I've got the 6'1", 215-pound quarterback, out of USC, Cody Kessler. So USC quarterbacks have been a mixed bag of results over the last 10 years, mostly bad. You go back through it, Matt Barkley, John David Booty, that's reaching a while back there, but Mark Sanchez, even all the way back to Matt Leinart, not great results. But Cody Kessler was a highly recruited guy. At the beginning of the year, he projected a little bit higher, but I think he's got some tools that can make a very good NFL quarterback. He's extremely accurate. Arm strength, not great. Not extremely athletic, but like I said, he's a very accurate passer, very high football IQ. Can be a solid 2nd, 3rd string quarterback for a team that really needs to beef up that position in rounds 4 to 7. So move on to my number 9 quarterback. I have the, I want to say 6'2". Yeah, 6'2", 230-pound quarterback out of Mississippi State, Dak Prescott. So I have him projected as a 4th to 7th round pick. I think that Dak Prescott was one of the best college quarterbacks on this list. He just doesn't really translate well to the NFL. He's kind of a put the team on my back sort of guy, and that works better in college than it does in the NFL. To me, Dak Prescott reminds me more of I'm not going to say Tim Tebow, but he is closer to that type than. There's not really many good quarterbacks out of the SEC right now, but more so than maybe a Cardale Jones or a Paxton Lynch. So I think that he's really reached his upside. This is a guy that if he does end up being successful in the NFL, it's just because he works hard. Obviously, you're going to get a guy that's a great leader, high work ethic, good football IQ. If you end up picking this guy, I mean, I am projected as a fourth to seventh round pick, probably the latter half of that. And like I said, you're getting a solid locker room guy if you end up getting Dak Prescott. Might go undrafted. I could see it happening. I might have him rated a little bit higher than some people. I really liked what he did in college. I think he was one of the best quarterbacks in the SEC, if not the best, for the last 2 years. So move on to my number 10 quarterback. And I've got the 6'2", 205-pound quarterback out of TCU, Trevon Boykin. So Trevon Boykin obviously had a really good, at least really good last 2 years at TCU. This year didn't end well for him, probably cost his draft stock at least a little bit. Coming into this year, he really was considered one of the 2 best quarterbacks in college football, if not the best. He was the leader in the Heisman race for quite a while. Obviously, like I said, the bar fight hurt his draft stock. Didn't get to play in the bowl game. Now, I think that Trevon Boykin might end up being successful in another position, kind of taking the Nick Marshall route and moving to corner or running back. He did play wide receiver at one point in college, played running back before as well. He's extremely athletic. But he's got a good arm. I think he's a guy that could be successful in the NFL. Obviously got high upside, just an unbelievable amount of athleticism. I really think he's a guy that a team should take a chance on. Let him get some time in the preseason, see what happens. But again, I've got him projected as a 7th round pick, maybe even undrafted. All right, so moving to my 5 outside. These guys are all projected as undrafted for me, but these are the 5 guys that are outside my top 10 that I felt like they should still be mentioned. So first one is, I'd say if any guy gets drafted out of my 5 outside, it's going to be him. But he is the 6'4", 235-pound quarterback out of NC State, Jacoby Brissett. So, again, have him projected as undrafted. Had a pretty good season in NC State, actually pretty good last 2 seasons, transferred up from Florida. A little complicated quarterback situation there. But I think that move was pretty good for him. He's got a good NFL frame. He can move pretty well for his size, a guy that compares very heavily to Cardale Jones. I think that really if you draft him or Cardale Jones, you're pretty much getting the same quarterback, just Cardale has a little bit more hype to the name. The problem with me for Jacoby Brissett is consistency. His accuracy is not there on a consistent basis. Some plays he makes just seem incredibly boneheaded. If you watched NC State this year, you saw it, especially in the bowl game. Now, he didn't have the greatest supporting cast around him. It wasn't terrible, but it wasn't great. And really, besides the game against Clemson, which actually kind of helped his draft stock a little bit, show that he could keep up with a high-powered offense like Clemson. But I think his problem is he's a little bit too overconfident in his ability on throwing on the run. Threw a lot of picks this year that way. And I think if he can tighten up his game a little bit, maybe I don't know if he's participating in the Senior Bowl this year, but I think if he can tighten up his game a little bit, have a good showing at the Senior Bowl and at the Combine if he does go. Again, he's an athletic guy, so he should have a good turnout if he does go to the Combine. Then he could slide his way maybe up into the 7th, 6th round. So, move on to my number 2, and I have the 6'6", 240-pound quarterback out of Indiana, Nate Sudfeld. So Sudfeld obviously had a decent season, taking Indiana to their first bowl game in what I want to say was like 5, maybe 7 or 8 years. Not a huge Indiana fan, so I'm not 100% sure on that, but it was a while. And they almost beat Duke. And like I said, it was a solid season for Indiana. They were in a lot of games, and a lot of that can be chalked up to Nate Sudfeld. He does have an NFL frame. He's got good size. Not that much athleticism, so that's going to hurt him a little bit. Can't really escape the pocket too well. Tough kid. It's just arm strength and accuracy, both, I'd say, mediocre. So I don't know how much upside he has. That's something I'd have to watch a little closer to see. But I know that he's worth mentioning. Again, a tough guy, got a good NFL frame. Not a whole lot of exposure on national television, so maybe a Senior Bowl, good turnout of the combine. Maybe an undrafted free agent gets a look in the preseason, could do him pretty well. So move on to my number 3 quarterback, and he is the 6', 219-pound quarterback out of Bowling Green, Matt Johnson. Now, Matt Johnson had a tremendous season. I actually watched Bowling Green quite a bit this year. It's just the offense that Bowling Green runs not very prototypical for the NFL. Doesn't really translate well. I think Matt Johnson could be a very good player in the NFL. Has a decent amount of low-key athleticism, can escape the pocket when he needs to. Doesn't have good size for the NFL. That's his biggest problem. Great arm strength, can fit the ball into a lot of tight windows. Accuracy comes and goes. But, again, Bowling Green, a lot of games I watched, they run spread option sort of offense, and, again, doesn't really translate well to the NFL, especially when you're a non-Power 5 quarterback. So move on to my number 4 on the 4 outside. Again, these are in no particular order. So I've got the 6'5", 232-pound quarterback out of Alabama, Jake Coker. So I probably wouldn't have Coker in here at all if he hadn't won the national championship. That helped his draft stock tremendously. But he wasn't even on the radar really before this year. I think that a team will probably take the chance on him. Again, tough kid, did what he had to do to win this year. Definitely got to give a lot of props to him with the season he had at Alabama. But, again, hard to tell his exact frame of reference, or the exact frame of reference for really any consistency for passing for him, just because Alabama didn't run a very pass-heavy offense. It was pretty much all on Derrick Henry this year. Jake Coker's a guy who can pick up the yards when he has to, a very tough runner. Got a decent amount of athleticism, so you do have that there for him. But like I said, just not that much consistent exposure of good tape for him with throwing power or accuracy. He had pretty inexperienced wide receiving crew this year. O.J. Howard didn't get the amount of exposure he probably should have. Calvin Ridley had a tremendous year, but a lot of those yards came off screens and slants. So, again, hard to tell for Jake Coker. Then my last one is another guy that probably will go undrafted, but I thought should be mentioned because he was a big name at the beginning of the year. He's a 6'4", 208-pound junior out of Cincinnati, Gunnar Kiel. Now, I think the biggest problem with Gunnar Kiel is he's a little bit undersized for his height. Cost him a little bit at Cincinnati. Injuries were a problem. Ended up getting injured in, I believe, the 4th game for Cincinnati this year, something like that, and got knocked out for the year. Got a concussion. I believe it was a major concussion and then a neck injury as well. Now, I think that Gunnar Kiel he's a decently athletic guy, can move around in the pocket, but he's got to be a little bit smarter. I think he's a guy that's got a very good amount, or he's got a good arm. He's got a good amount of accuracy, but it's one that's going to have to be touched up. Not a very consistent arm right now. Alright, so that concludes my NFL Draft Big Board, my rankings for the quarterbacks. So that is my, I guess, technically top 16. Top 11 ranked out, and then after that, my 5 outside. So, alright, I will be coming back with my running backs in the next video, wide receivers probably after that, so make sure you go check that out. That's pretty much it. So, yeah. On YouTube, so I want to come back with my 2016 NFL mock draft with the college football season drawn to a close. It's about that time to start speculating on next year's rankings, next year's draft picks, and where everyone in the where all the NFL draft prospects will fall in those rankings. So I guess start